Hello to everyone who will be joining or will be watching this at a later time. My name is Kelsey. I am a therapist at Makin Wellness. We are an online telehealth company, and our mission is to help millions of people heal and to become happy again. So we are founded by CEO Sarah Makin. She founded the company in 2017, and we have grown quite a lot since then. And we now have about 35 providers that have a range of multiple, specialties and different therapeutic modalities. So that is a really great thing. And if you guys have any questions about Makin Wellness later on, I think that, we have a chat going here for whoever does join, or you guys can always reach out to us at a later time, and I will provide all of you with that later on. So I'm going to share my screen at this point. All right. And okay, here we go. So I cannot see who is joining if I do that. So hold on here just one second. All right, yeah, so I cannot see you guys now that I've shared this screen. So Jen, I don't know if you want to help me out here and if there are like any questions on the chat, or if anyone has any questions, just feel free to unmute yourselves and just speak out, especially if we have a small group. I'm totally cool with that. And we will go ahead and get started. Okay, so yeah, as I mentioned, I put up both of our little logos here. This is for Makin Wellness, and we were talking about stress management today. A little bit about myself. So as we mentioned, I am a therapist at Makin Wellness, and I'm also a certified yoga teacher. So later on in the webinar, I will talk a little bit about mindfulness and some really awesome stress techniques from kind of yoga world and yoga land. And I'm also a PhD candidate, and I am getting my PhD in counselor education. So that's essentially learning how to teach therapists how to be therapists, right? So that is a little bit about me. And again, I know we have a small group here, and the main reason for this webinar is to record it and kind of share it as a later time. But for whoever is joining, I'd love to make this as interactive as possible. I've been on the end of some boring Zoom webinars, so we can try to avoid that, and feel free to, like I said, interrupt me and ask any questions that you guys have. Okay, so here is our agenda. Okay, I wonder if I can move this up a little bit. Okay, so I wanted to start it off as a discussion, but again, given that I recognize that this is being recorded and maybe saved for a later time, we can kind of fast forward through that. And then we're going to go through some introductions of, again, kind of a little bit more of what we do. And then we'll kind of go into the meat of this, right? How to manage stress, work-life boundaries, mindfulness, and we'll talk a little bit about therapy. And then we can end with some more discussion for whoever might have some questions. All right, it's not letting me use my little, there we go. Okay. So what I wanted to kind of start off for this is to talk about, I wanted to hear more so from you guys. And again, if you're watching this at a later recorded date, maybe you can just kind of reflect on these questions internally, which is, what is it like to be a vet? Why did you kind of go into this work profession to kind of start us off? And then how would you describe your work environment? So as you reflect on your day-to-day and what it's like when you wake up, what it's like when you leave work, what thoughts and feelings come to your mind about that? What is the most stressful part of your job? So a lot of the times what I see in my work as a therapist is clients tend to really overgeneralize things, right? I'm stressed, I'm overwhelmed. And it's easy to kind of make those blanket general statements. And part of my job is to pull apart those statements and say, okay, well, what are you stressed about? Let's get specific about that. What exactly is the part of the job that really bothers you the most? Because when one thing happens, like I said, we kind of have this tendency to generalize it into all other areas. So it's important to really get specific. So I would encourage you all to think about that. And then how do you overcome your stress? What are some coping skills or some general activities that you have now that work for you or maybe don't work for you? So I'd encourage you to take a moment to reflect on some of those questions before we really get into the meat more of this presentation. And if anyone has any questions now or any responses to that, please feel free to jump in. Okay, I really love this meme. And this little screen is blocking it right now, but it's, do you want your life to be different? Client says, yeah. Therapist says, then you have to do things differently. That's whack, right? A lot of the times we don't really want to change whatever habits that we're used to. And that's one of the first things I ask my clients, or, when you start to get into conversation about stress management or what can be done differently, is like, are you willing to change up whatever you're doing right now? And another question to ask yourself is, do you even think that anything needs changing, right? That would probably be question number one. So again, a little bit of an introduction, and I mentioned this already as we started, but we are Pennsylvania's highest rated team of specialized, professional, and accredited online therapists. What we do is we support you with a wide variety of issues, including anxiety, depression, stress, grief, trauma, couples counseling, family counseling, and more. And what are we doing here? So I'm here to talk to you about how you can best attend to your mental health while also navigating the demands of a stressful career. Okay, how to maintain mental health and manage stress. So let's first talk about burnout, because again, I don't know specifically how much you guys or vets in general feel, but I do know that I hear this a lot when it comes to high stress work environments, high grief filled work environments. And overall, I hear about this a lot, burnout, lack of engagement within my clients. So there are three components to burnout. The first is exhaustion. It is kind of that central component of burnout. It comprises, profound physical, cognitive, and emotional fatigue that undermines people's ability to work effectively and feel positive about what they're doing. So this can stem from the demands of an always kind of on 24/7 organizational culture, intense time pressure, or simply having too much to do, especially when you lack control over your work, or you dislike it, or you don't necessarily have the skills to accomplish it. And in a state of exhaustion, you find that you're unable to concentrate or see the big picture, and even routine and previously enjoyable tasks seem harder, and it becomes difficult to drag yourself both into and out of the office. So I'm not sure if maybe that component is something that you guys are feeling, or if that's a piece of this. The next is cynicism, and that's also can be called kind of depersonalization. And it represents, an erosion of engagement. So it is essentially a way of distancing yourself psychologically from your work. And instead of feeling invested in assignments, projects, colleagues, customers, in your case, surgeries, appointments, you feel detached, negative, even callous. And I feel like, you guys are in a very similar job sometimes that I am in, which is that you're constantly dealing with pretty, sick animals. And sometimes I don't want to label people as sick, but people who are dealing with some stuff, right? Both of us are dealing with with people and animals and who need help. And sometimes that callous piece or compassion fatigue, as they call it, right, is a pretty high result of work that you and I do. So this is something to really, I don't want to say that I understand, because we're taught to never say that we necessarily understand what someone else is going through, but it's definitely something I think that I can relate to. Cynicism can be the result of work overload, but it is also likely to occur in the presence of high conflict, unfairness, lack of preparation and decision-making, or overall some of that compassion work that's filled with some compassion fatigue. Lastly is inefficiency. So this refers to feelings of incompetence and a lack of achievement and productivity. People with this symptom of burnout feel their skills slipping and worry that they won't be able to succeed in certain situations or accomplish certain tasks. It also develops in tandem with exhaustion and cynicism, because people can't perform at their peak when they're out of fuel and have lost connection to their work. So I'd like you to take a moment and reflect on if any one of these three components of burnout resonates with you more or less than some of the others, and to really try to, like I said, identify that and get specific. So how to respond. Self-care is a really big buzzword in society right now, and I have mixed feelings about that, but self-care really is important, and it's really awesome that a lot of professions and different organizations are prioritizing self-care in their employees, and I think that's totally what NOMV is here to do, especially for vets, which is really awesome. So it's, self-care it's essential to replenish your physical and emotional energy, along with your capacity to focus, by prioritizing things like good sleep habits and nutrition and exercise and social connection, and things like meditation, journaling, and enjoying nature. Some of that stuff is in yoga land, which we'll talk about later. If you're having trouble squeezing such activities into your packed schedule, give yourself a week to assess exactly how you're spending your time. So again, we want to get specific, and maybe next week you start on Monday, or maybe start today, and you really pay attention to how you spend your time. And if you're one of those people that always says, oh, I don't have time to do that, get curious about why. Because I always say, if we really wanted to fit something in, we would find the time. Next is to shift your perspective. So while rest and relaxation and replenishment can ease exhaustion, curb cynicism, and enhance efficacy, they don't fully address the root cause of burnout. So back at the office, you may still face the same impossible workload, untenable conflicts, or paltry resources. So now you must take a close look at your mindset and assumptions, right? What aspects of your situation are truly fixed, and which can you change? Which do you have control over? Which is a fixed mindset and which is a growth mindset? So altering your perspective can buffer the negative impact of even the inflexible aspects. If exhaustion is a key problem, for example, ask yourself which tasks, including critical ones, you could delegate to free up meaningful time and energy for other important work. Are there ways to reshape your job in order to gain more control, or to focus on maybe the more fulfilling tasks? If cynicism is a major issue, for example, can you shield yourself from the parts of the organization that frustrate you, while re-engaging in your specific role in the whole enterprise? Or you could build some positive, supportive relationships to counteract the ones that drain you, right? And if you're feeling ineffective, what assistance or development might you seek out? If recognition is lacking, could you engage in some personal branding to showcase your work, right? So again, a lot of this stuff that I'm talking about can feel vague to all professions, but we can get really specific, and only you know the answer to how this can apply specifically to your own work. And I also think that applies to, whether you're working as a vet in a private practice, or an emergency hospital, or, whatever other setting there is that's most conducive to what your work is kind of described as. So reducing exposure to job stressors. This is another way of how to respond to burnout. Can you target high value activities and relationships that still trigger unhealthy stress, right? So this involves resetting the expectations of colleagues, clients, customers, even family members for what and how much you're willing to take on, as well as ground rules for working together. So you may get pushback with doing this, but doubters must know that you're making these changes to improve your long-term productivity and protect your health. And it's really, we'll talk a little bit more about boundaries, but this really flirts on the lines of boundaries as well. Excuse me. So lastly, seek out connections. The best antidote to burnout, particularly when it's driven by cynicism and inefficiency, is seeking out rich interpersonal interactions and continual personal and professional development. So can you find coaches and mentors who can help you identify and activate positive relationships and learning opportunities? Volunteering to advise others is another particularly effective way of breaking out of a negative cycle, right? It brings some more meaning and purpose into our life. And given the influence of situational factors on burnout, it's likely that others in your organization are suffering too. So if you band together to offer that mutual support, identify problems and brainstorm and advocate for your solutions, you will all increase your sense of control and connection. And this is why NOMV is so great, right? This is exactly what the organization of NOMV is totally seeking out, those connections and connecting with other people who maybe share similar feelings about the nature of the job. And this is such an excellent resource to have for support and to rely on one another. So overall, I want to acknowledge that burnout can feel really insurmountable, but the sense of being overwhelmed is a signal, not a long-term sentence. So by understanding the symptoms and causes and implementing these 4 strategies, you can recover and build a roadmap for prevention. So just because you feel overwhelmed now, it doesn't mean that it has to be a long-term road. And lastly, I think it's important to say that this experience of suffering, which is a part of the human experience, can serve as a turning point that launches you into a more sustainable career and a happy and healthier life. Okay. Managing stress in a grief-filled work environment. So this is a little bit more of how we can respond to a grief-filled work environment, a stressful work environment. And again, I think this is something that I really understand, given that, you know, my work environment can also feel like it's filled with, you know, anxiety and grief and stress and people who are unhappy. So this is something that I think these 6 steps are really important. Okay. So here are some signs of grief, stress, burnout is when you prefer to be alone or you find yourself in social isolation, which I think all of us have experienced, you know, coming out of the pandemic. Nightmares and sleep disturbances, changes in appetite, aches and pains that cannot be explained. So that's kind of some of your psychology kind of being manifested in the body. Dissociation and difficulty connecting with the world, and an increase in numbing behaviors. So the first is to identify your stressors as a response to this. So can you make a list of the factors in your life that contribute to your stress? Again, getting specific here. We're going to focus on, you know, inside work, but obviously stuff outside work can be applied too to this idea. So what part of the job is the hardest for you? Acknowledge it, know that it's there and that that's your thing. Number 2, stop procrastinating. Do the hardest thing first. So avoidance is a very insidious habit. And I find that avoidance is what leads to more problems rather than just doing that hard thing first. So when you walk into your job and you're avoiding a surgery that you have or an appointment that you have with a particularly difficult client, right? To think about how can I address that first? How can I keep pushing that? You know, you don't want to keep on pushing your feelings out to the side. And even if you can't address the hardest thing first, because let's say it's at 3 p.m. of the day, can you address your feelings about it first and foremost, right? Rather than keep pushing it to the side. I see the pattern of avoidance all the time in my work, and our delays in avoidance really amp up our stress levels. So the third is to keep your balance. Protecting your time from overcommitments that are within your control isn't easy, but it's one of the most effective things you can do to reduce stress. So say no to longer work hours or extra days. We are in an era where workers and employees have a say. There's a shortage of vets right now. So you are not replaceable and you can't pour from an empty cup. So if you say no, put your needs first and take care of yourself first, you'll be able to better show up in your job. 4, avoid negative escapes. So when we are stressed, it's tempting to turn to excessive eating or spending or substance abuse. And that's because we want to do something to change our mood, right? It makes sense. And of course, the list of unhelpful and unhealthy escapes could go on, but negative escapes only spread negativity throughout our life. So healthy habits may take some effort, but like most investments, they pay off later rather than immediately in the short term. 5, break out of isolation. We are probably the loneliest the history of our species has ever seen, unfortunately. Studies show that supportive relationships are essential to improving how we experience and process stress. So in fact, loneliness is linked not only to depression, but also to health problems, including high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and cognitive decline. It's actually really crazy research. And other studies show that people who are involved in faith communities tend to have lower levels of anxiety and stress. And when I say faith communities, that can look a variety of different ways. Like that doesn't mean like that you need to all of a sudden adopt religiosity in your life and start going to church, but that can mean any type of community out there that you can be involved in. Again, NOMV, great resource. Can you get involved in your local community with local clubs that you can join? Anything along those lines to feel like you're a part of a bigger thing can really combat some of those feelings of loneliness. And then lastly, again, is to take care of your body. We briefly touched on this already, but one of the best things you can do to handle the stresses of life is to fortify your health in your body. So eating right, getting enough sleep, and exercising regularly relieve feelings of stress and anxiety, improve your mood, and energize your body, brain, and emotions. There is so much research to support the mind-body connection. And I know maybe the last thing we want to do is exercise after a long day, but moving your body has a direct impact on your brain and how you feel emotionally. So it's impossible to eliminate all stress from your life, and managing stress is another matter entirely. How much stress you experience and how you respond when you experience it are things that you have more control over than we realize. Okay, I see that we have a few more folks who joined us. Thank you for joining us. And please, if you weren't here to hear what I said before, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions you may have. I'll have some discussion questions in a few more slides, so look out for that. Okay. I really like this meme. Did someone say boundaries? You have to set boundaries. Okay, it's really great. We kind of touched upon boundaries early on when we spoke about, you guys there's a shortage of vets right now, and employees have more of an upper hand than they have for probably the past 100 years of work history. So don't be afraid to say no, and don't be afraid to put your needs first. Okay. Let's talk about mindfulness, because mindfulness is a really, really important thing here. What is mindfulness? It's paying attention to what is occurring in one's immediate experience with care and discernment. It's knowing the state of your mind in this moment without judging it, evaluating it, thinking about it, or trying to change it. It's a way of relating to an all experience positive, it's a way of relating to all experience, positive, negative, or neutral, in an open and receptive way. So it's not about always being positive. It's about acknowledging that even if you are in a little bit of a negative headspace, you're just aware of that. You just accept that. And then cultivating awareness of the mind and body and living in the here and now. So I think at the deepest level, mindfulness is about freedom. It's freedom from reflexive patterns, freedom from reactivity, and ultimately freedom from suffering. Mindfulness can be summed up in, I think, really 2 words, which is pay attention. Pay attention to the thoughts that cross your mind. Pay attention to your external stimuli. Emotions, they're not good or bad or right or wrong. They're simply just states and signals that alert us to the external stimuli that is causing them. So instead of acknowledging, an emotion and then like running with it, it's just paying attention to it and getting curious rather than reactive about what it's doing there. Once you notice what you're doing, you have the power to change it. That is really where that pay attention piece comes from. So I have down here a model of mindfulness practice. The first is intention. So intention is why one practices mindfulness. And I think it's important to note the difference here between mindfulness and meditation, because often they get confused. Meditation is the act of practicing mindfulness, right? It's when you sit. It's this lovely lady here in the photo. It's when you sit and you're actively practicing it, versus mindfulness can be practiced every day, in all moments, in everything that you're doing. You can be mindful when you're eating, really tasting your food, really paying attention to what your experience is. You can be mindful when you're having sex. You can be mindful on a walk. You can be mindful with your work, right? So that's kind of the difference there. And if anyone has any questions about that, if I could further explain, please let me know. But the intention, it sets the stage for what is possible. It's dynamic, it's evolving. And the mindful practice of the intention can bring unconscious values into awareness. We can decide whether they are really values that we want to pursue. And we can develop wholesome values and decrease unwholesome ones due to this present awareness. The next is attention. So attention involves observing the operations of one's moment-to-moment internal and external experience. Remember, it can be summed up to two words: pay attention, right? Mindfulness allows for attention to the external world and the contents of one's consciousness moment by moment. Attention is discerning and non-reactive. So we can see clearly what is arising in the present moment, including one's emotional reactions. So again, it really goes back to getting curious rather than getting reactive. And lastly is attitude. So that is how one attends, how one shows up. It's affectionate attention. It infuses the lens of attention with curiosity and openness and acceptance and love. So I want to speak briefly to the research of mindfulness. Is an evidence-based treatment at this point. It's really saturated in the research, which means that it's actually hard to do more research on mindfulness because it's been so heavily researched at this point, and so many studies are out there that prove how great it is for our well-being. Meditation and mindfulness have been shown to increase focus, reduce stress, promote calmness. And it's, as I mentioned, an evidence-based treatment that has been shown to reduce symptoms of anxiety and depression and stress. Okay. Does anyone have any questions so far? Okay. So lastly, I want to acknowledge, don't be afraid to talk to someone. Sorry, I just lost my notes here. There we go. Don't be afraid to talk to someone. So obviously, as a therapist, I'm biased. Part of the reason I became a therapist is because I signed up for therapy many years ago when I was actually lost about a career. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and I didn't know what my career direction was. And I was in therapy for 3 years, and I had such a profound experience that it really changed my life. And so I have this quote down here too that's important, that I love, and I think that really captures the beauty of therapy, which is, we seek therapy not for an explanation, but for an experience. So right now, a lot of this webinar has been an explanation, and explanations are great, but they are different from a healing and therapeutic experience, right? Therapy isn't just, me sitting up here and saying, you should exercise more, or you should eat better, but it's really fostering that therapeutic alliance and building that rapport with someone who's unbiased in your life, and working with them to come up with the answers on your own. Because only you know yourself best. Your therapist doesn't know you. Sure, they're a professional expert, but they don't have all the answers for you, and they don't know what's right for you. So it's really that collaborative experience of coming up with those answers and these solutions together. Okay. And again, please feel free to answer these questions. I'd love for this to be kind of an interactive discussion. But again, if you're seeing this or listening to this as a recording, I would encourage you to perhaps journal about these questions or just deeply reflect on them, taking that 5 minutes to really think about what these questions kind of mean to you. So what is the best part about your day, your job? What is something that you look forward to? What inspired you to become a veterinarian to begin with? Can you take yourself back to, when you got that score on the test that you needed to get into school? Can you take yourself back to the moment where you got accepted into veterinary school, because that's a huge accomplishment? Can you take yourself back to those feelings and those emotions of what caused you to pursue this in the first place? And then what is one thing about your job that you can change that is within your control? And again, please feel free to either reflect on these silently or jump in and write something in the chat or unmute yourself. Okay. And that is all I have for you guys today. So thank you very much for participating and for watching and for your time. If you're, I don't think NOMV is like based in Pennsylvania particularly, but if you have any more questions about our company or what we do, please follow us on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok. We have a lot of like tips and tricks that we post all the time, and feel free to visit our website, and please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. You can find my information on our website, and here's our number too if you have any questions. So I'm going to stop share now. And I'm going to pause here for any more questions or last minute thoughts, and then I will refer to Jen to wrap us up, perhaps.
Yes, I'll leave it open for a minute or two to see if there's any questions. But otherwise, thank you everyone for attending. This webinar was recorded, so it will be able to be viewed at a later date as well. And like Kelsey said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to her or to Makin Wellness.